and welcome back to my channel, RPG Retro Reviews. This video is part 3 of a 4-part series on how to play Dungeons & Dragons. If you haven't already watched the first 2 parts, you might want to check those videos out first, as many of the terms and concepts I use in this video are explained in the first 2 parts. In part 1, the introduction, I explained what a role-playing game is and talked about some basic terms used in Dungeons & Dragons. In part 2, we actually created a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons character named Brenna Thorgood. In this video, part 3, the rules, I'm going to explain some basic rule concepts about Dungeons & Dragons and give you, the player, enough information to get you ready for your first Dungeons & Dragons game session. Are you ready? Let's begin. The core mechanic in Dungeons & Dragons begins with a roll of a 20-sided die, abbreviated as D20. This roll is used whenever some player action in the game has a chance of failure, such as attempting to jump over a pit, scale a wall, find a trap, or strike a monster with your sword. The Dungeon Master will secretly set a difficulty number based on what it is the character is trying to do. The difficulty number could be a set value, such as the save difficulty for a wizard's spells or the armor class of a monster. In any case, the player rolls a d20, modifies the roll for their ability score, if any, and also their proficiency bonus, if applicable. If the modified roll is higher than the difficulty number, then the attempt succeeds. If it's lower, then it fails. This is essentially the core of the entire game system. If you understand this, then you know how to play Dungeons & Dragons. Now, let's talk about the character's proficiency bonus. The proficiency bonus applies to any skill or weapon with which your character is proficient, and gradually increases as your character progresses in levels, according to this chart here from page 15 of the player's handbook. If a character doesn't have proficiency in a skill, it doesn't mean they can't attempt to try the task, though the chance of failure will be greater and the proficiency bonus is not applied to the die roll. Though, if the character has an ability score modifier, that is still applied. A character's class and background determines what skills they are proficient in, and I discussed this in some detail in my previous video of this series. You can find a list of skills on page 174 of the player's handbook and descriptions on each. Some skill checks can be passive. That is, no die roll is required as the DM assumes a base score of 10 plus any bonus such as ability score and proficiency bonuses. Passive checks are great for checks that are used over and over again, or when the DM wants to secretly determine success or failure. A common passive check in the game is the perception check. Perception is used to help the DM determine a character's awareness of their surroundings, such as when monsters are hidden in darkness, about to spring an ambush, or to spot a clue. The DM will determine whether a passive or active check is to be used, sometimes even secretly rolling the die to determine success. Certain skills can be opposing, such as when one character is trying to hide while another character is trying to find them. The hiding character makes a stealth check, and the character trying to find them makes a perception check. The character that rolls higher succeeds. Some checks can be easier or more difficult than others. In these cases, the DM might apply advantage or disadvantage to the check. When you have advantage, you roll 2 d20 and take the higher of the 2 rolls. And when you have disadvantage, you roll 2 d20 and take the lower of the 2 rolls. This system replaces the need to keep track of a complicated set of situational modifiers. Arguably, one of the most exciting but more complex aspects of Dungeons & Dragons is combat. Nothing gets the blood pumping faster than being beset upon by a horde of orcs, undead, or other foul beasties. This is when it's time to unsheath that sword and ready your spells and unleash devastation upon the armies of evil. Well, that's the way you hope it will go. To determine how it actually goes, D&D uses its rules to allow for a variety of tactical situations and organizes the chaos of combat into an orderly sequence known as the combat round, representing a period of about 6 seconds in the game world. During that time, the various sides get to act at least once, though higher level characters and many monsters can do several things at once as well, such as when a monster claws and then bites. There are several defined actions in combat, such as movement, standard action, bonus action, and reaction action. Everyone gets movement and a standard action. Bonus actions and reaction actions are situational and further defined by a character's class and level of ability, but more of that in a moment. Once the DM determines that combat is about to begin, he does several things. It's quite possible that some parties are unaware that they are about to be attacked or aware of the impending danger due to failed perception checks or what have you. Unaware characters are surprised and do not get to act during the first combat round. The order of combat is determined by each participant making a dex check and then acting in order from highest to lowest. On your turn, you can do a variety of things, only really limited by your imagination and the short time span allotted. As discussed in the previous video, on your character sheet is your character's movement rate. On a tactical map, 1 square equals 5 feet. So, if you have a movement rate of 30, that means your character can move up to 6 squares and then take a combat action. There are basically 10 standard actions your character can take in combat, though all classes, as the character advances in levels, potentially have even more. The 10 combat actions are attack, cast a spell, dash, disengage, dodge, help, hide, ready, search, and use an object. So let's talk about each action individually. And the attack action lets you attack once with a melee or ranged weapon. Certain class features, monster abilities, and situations may give you or your opponent additional attack actions during the round. Cast a spell. Note that this is not an attack action, but a standard action of its own. Clerics, wizards, and other spellcasters use this action to cast their spells. Some spells, like Magic Missile, are attacks, but a spellcaster uses the cast a spell action, not the attack action, to do so. Some spells take more than one round to cast. Dash. Rather than attacking, you may elect to take additional movement. The dash action allows for this. Generally, barring situational or spell effects, you get to use your standard movement rate a second time in the same round. Disengage. Sometimes, rather than stay and fight, if you're overwhelmed, it might be time to leave. If you do not want your opponent to get an opportunity to attack on you as you do so, you must take the disengage action. Dodge. The dodge action allows you to keep yourself engaged in melee combat, but rather than focus on attacks, you concentrate entirely on defense. Your opponent attacks with disadvantage when you take the dodge action. Help. You basically aid an ally in the completion of a task, giving that ally advantage on a roll. Alternatively, you can try to feint or distract an enemy within 5 feet of you, with an ally that is within 5 feet of you, thus giving your ally advantage on their next attack. Hide. You take the hide action, and following the rules on hiding may get certain combat advantages on your attacks. For example, at second level, rogues can take this as a bonus action, potentially allowing them to use their sneak attack and attack with advantage on the following round. Ready. Sometimes you don't want to act when it's your turn in the initiative queue. Instead, waiting for a particular circumstance to occur before you act. In this case, you tell the DM what it is that will trigger you to act, and then the combat continues. When the trigger occurs, you act before anyone else with your readied action. You can also use this action to ready a spell, and then use your reaction to release the spell when the trigger occurs. Search. You use your action to try and find something. The DM may require a roll like a perception check in order to succeed, if indeed there is something there to be found. Use an object. Some objects, especially potions and magical items like wands, require an action to activate them. You do that with a use an object action. To make an attack, you simply roll a d20, apply all applicable modifiers such as your proficiency bonus, ability score, and any class or racial bonuses you may have, total them, and compare them with the opponent's armor class. If it is equal to or higher, then the attack has succeeded. You then roll the appropriate damage dice based on the type of weapon you are using. Weapon statistics can be found on page 149 of the player's handbook. Individual spell descriptions can be found beginning on page 207 of the player's handbook. And this underscores an important part about the rules of Dungeons & Dragons. Yes, the books are thick, but it's not important that you know all the rules in order to play. This is a reference work as much as it is a rule book. For example, in order for your player to cast the first level spell Magic Missile, you do not need to know the third level spell Fireball. You, like your character, will learn of these abilities when it becomes necessary for your character to know them. Of course, as you play, you will become familiar with many rules and concepts through repetition. Thus, the scope of this video is only to prepare the neophyte player for their first few game sessions, after which you will begin to absorb the rules based on your character's class and what abilities and skills you are interested in choosing. All of the character classes have various choices and paths for the player to follow that opens up new sets of abilities, making each character unique and interesting. That's part of the fun of Dungeons & Dragons, growing along with your character and your skill as a player. This is a problem-solving, group cooperation game. The stories are as endless as your imagination, and the dynamic of all the different classes and individual players' personalities means that the story develops in unforeseen directions that even the dungeon master can't predict. It is this dynamic that makes D&D and role-playing games in general so much fun to play week after week and year after year. If you enjoy this type of entertainment, you have probably found a new and exciting hobby that will last a lifetime. Well, that's as far as I'm going to go as far as rules discussion. The rest is up to you to discover. My next video will be an actual play example in Part 4, Dungeons & Dragons demonstration. So look for that soon. In addition, I have more RPG retro reviews coming up. If you enjoy this video and retro-style role-playing games, then please take a look at my other reviews and subscribe for more. Until then, my friends, as always, may your D20 roll true, and game on!